My family said I wasn't one of them anymore. So I canceled the mortgage they forgot I was paying, and then I was midway through folding a sweatshirt into my bag when my phone lit up on the counter. Riley had just left to grab a few last-minute things for the trip: wine, protein bars, trail mix. This weekend was supposed to be our reset, our breath of quiet away from the grind. We'd booked the place 4 months ago, a small cabin outside Crestwood, Colorado, tucked deep in the woods near the edge of a lake neither of us could pronounce. No service, no noise, no obligations. I'd worked 60-hour weeks to carve out the time, said no to overtime, ignored extra contracts. This was supposed to be the one weekend we actually got to disappear. So when I saw my mother's name flash across the screen, my stomach dropped. I didn't open the message right away. I didn't need to. She always found a way to ask for something that sounded reasonable but wasn't. When I finally unlocked the phone, her words were so predictable it almost felt scripted. "Hey, honey, Kayla's daycare canceled, and she's stuck at the store again. Could you come watch the boys this weekend? Just this once. Just this once." Always those 3 words. Like I hadn't canceled other trips, missed other moments, turned down other offers because someone else in the family had hit a bump and needed me to fill the gap. Just this once, like it hadn't already been 27 times over the last 6 years. Kayla was my sister. She was 2 years younger than me and had 2 kids with 2 different guys who hadn't been around long enough to learn the kids' shoe sizes. She worked late shifts at a chain hardware store and always had an excuse. Always. Sometimes I really did believe she was trying. But most times, I knew exactly what was happening. She wasn't trying. She was counting on me. I took a long breath and typed back, "Can't help this time. Riley and I are going to the cabin. It's already paid for." The dots danced on the screen for a second, then stopped, then started again. Then came the message. "Seriously, Caleb? You're going to ignore your family for a weekend in the woods? You're not even part of this family anymore." It didn't feel like a slap. It felt like someone slicing something clean, like the last fraying thread finally giving way. I sat down slowly at the edge of the couch, read her words 3 more times, and smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was so completely expected. She'd been saying versions of that same sentence for years, hadn't she? Every time I said no, she reminded me who I was supposed to be, her backup, her savior, her second husband in all but name. This time, she just said it plainly. I replied, "Okay then. Don't expect me to keep paying the mortgage." No response. No follow-up. Just silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel like absence. It felt like a warning. I stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, and opened my laptop. If I was really out of the family, then I was out. All the way. I wasn't going to keep subsidizing the very people who saw me as useful only when I gave more than I had. I pulled up the banking app I'd been using since my first decent tech job. First thing I did was locate the monthly transfer labeled June mortgage, $1,148 withdrawn like a metronome on the 1st of every month. I'd been covering the balance since Mom fell behind 4 years ago. Never missed a payment. She never asked where the money came from. She just stopped talking about late fees like they didn't exist anymore. I hit cancel. Then I logged into the tuition platform I used to transfer funds directly to Devin's school. He was my youngest sibling, 22, undecided major at Briarview College. Marketing, then journalism, then back to general studies. I didn't mind helping at first, but the money was going into meal plans and textbook fees he never read, and lately I'd started seeing his social media posts from bars near campus. I closed the tuition portal. Last came the emergency card, the one only I had access to, the one that, somehow, kept ending up linked to delivery charges from Kayla's neighborhood and gas stations near her ex's house. I called the bank, reported unauthorized use, froze the line, and requested a new card. It was supposed to be for hospital copays or car breakdowns. Instead, it had become a shared family wallet that only I filled. I was done. I opened the family group chat. It had been quiet for a week, which usually meant things were about to get noisy. I wrote my message and didn't read it twice. "Since Mom says I'm not part of this family anymore, this is just to confirm it. All financial contributions have ended. Mortgage support, Devin's tuition, and the emergency card are all canceled as of tonight." Attached are the screenshots from the past 5 years. Total amount paid, $61,227. I never did this for thanks. But I'm not going to keep bleeding for people who only notice me when I say no. I attached the images, hit send, and closed the app before I could see their replies. My hands were shaking. My chest was tight, but it wasn't fear. It was release. Like something I'd been carrying too long had finally been set down, even if my arms still didn't understand how to stop holding it. 5 minutes later, Riley walked in with 2 lattes and a half smile. She raised an eyebrow as she saw my face. "Everything all right?" she asked, already guessing the answer. I nodded. Maybe for the first time in years, I wasn't lying. "Yeah," I said. "I'm really ready for this weekend." What I didn't tell her, not yet, was that this trip wasn't just a break. It was a beginning. Because when my mother said I wasn't part of the family anymore, something in me finally accepted it. I didn't fight it. I didn't try to fix it. I believed her. The first reply came just after we crossed the county line, and the trees began closing in around the road like an old secret. I hadn't checked my phone since we left Crestwood, and I wouldn't have, but I saw the alert flash across the dashboard screen and recognized Kayla's name. Against my better judgment, I opened the message, expecting fury or denial, maybe both. Instead, it was panic, frantic and shameless, and written like an accusation wrapped in desperation. "Are you actually serious? You can't just cut us off like this. What the hell am I supposed to do with the boys all weekend? You know I don't have a backup." There wasn't a single word in that message about how I might be feeling. No mention of the 5 years of support she leaned on like a crutch. No recognition that maybe, just maybe, I had a right to draw a line. It was as if my decision wasn't a decision at all, but a betrayal of some unwritten contract that I'd never been allowed to revise. Then Devin chimed in, 20 minutes later, clearly trying to sound more composed than he probably felt. "Bro, finals are next week, and I already budgeted assuming your support would be there. This timing is seriously messed up." Messed up. That was the phrase that got under my skin. Messed up. As if I had deliberately picked the most inconvenient time to stop sacrificing for them. Like I was just throwing a tantrum with perfect dramatic precision. It wasn't about timing. It was about years of slowly bleeding for people who never once asked if I was okay, if I was tired, if I had anything left. When we pulled into the gravel driveway and Riley started unloading the bags, I sat on the porch steps and opened the group chat again, knowing full well I'd find what I was looking for. There it was. A long message from Mom, written in the chaos of all caps and frantic typos that told me she hadn't taken a single breath while typing it. "How dare you do this to us, Caleb, after everything we did for you? You think you're better than your own family just because you have some tech job and a girlfriend? You should be ashamed." It was everything I expected and less. Not one mention of the $61,000 I'd sent over 5 years. Not one acknowledgement of the credit card charges she'd quietly let others rack up. Not even a moment of reflection that maybe, just maybe, she had leaned too hard for too long. She called 20 minutes later. I watched the phone ring from across the room. Saw her name flickering on the screen like a warning light I'd been ignoring for too many miles. I let it go to voicemail. Riley was building a fire and humming some song I didn't know. I didn't want to break that moment with the sound of my mother trying to guilt me through the speaker. It didn't stop them. Over the next few hours, more messages came, each one more absurd than the last. Kayla sent a voice note that started with a scream and only got worse from there. "You have no one else, Jack? You know that. I can't do this alone, and if I lose this apartment, it's going to be on you. I swear to God." Devin, proving he was either too immature to understand or too numb to care, followed that with a meme. A meme. It showed a guy burning a bridge with the caption, "When you ruin your whole family because you're throwing a tantrum." That was how little it meant to them. The years, the money, the silence. It could be mocked with a meme. By the time the sun dipped low and Riley brought me a glass of wine, I had already scrolled through half a dozen messages, each one less about what I'd done and more about how my refusal to keep sacrificing had ruined their lives. The best one came from Mom again, a guilt sandwich if there ever was one. "Remember when I stayed up with you all night, when you had that fever in 5th grade? Or when I gave up my weekend so you could go to that robotics camp? I'm your mother, Caleb. Families fight, but we don't abandon each other. I stared at that message a long time, because I did remember those things. But I also remembered being 13 and cooking spaghetti for Kayla and Devin because Mom was crying in the bathroom again over another bounce check. I remembered giving up a college internship because she said she couldn't handle all three of us alone. I remembered missing job interviews, holiday trips, and every single moment of peace because someone always needed something more than I did. That night, Riley and I sat on the cabin porch wrapped in one heavy blanket, letting the cold air bite at our faces while the fire inside crackled like a lullaby. I hadn't told her everything yet, but she sensed it anyway. She looked at me for a long time, then said softly, "You okay?" I looked out into the trees, toward the dark shape of the lake, then back to her, and nodded. "I think I just quit my family," I said. She didn't flinch. She didn't push. She just nodded back and said, "It's about time." By Sunday morning, my phone had racked up 28 unread texts, from missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and one email from Devin, of all people. It was short. Just 2 lines. "Hey, I get that you're upset. Can we talk?" For a second, I almost replied. Almost. But I knew that rhythm too well. That soft opening line, meant to pull me back in. That gentle little crack in the wall, so they could slip back through and start the cycle again. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the group chat again. The tone had shifted overnight. The rage was mutating into self-preservation. Kayla's messages read like legal disclaimers now. "For the record, I didn't use that credit card without permission. You told us it was for emergencies. You never actually said what kind." Then came the pivot to moral outrage. "I think it's disgusting that you would cut off your nephews like this. They didn't do anything to deserve this. You're punishing children for adult problems." Mom's tone had cooled into something colder, more dangerous. Less begging, more simmering resentment hiding behind tired words. "This family is falling apart, and it's because of you. I talked to the bank. They said they can't undo the changes unless you authorize it. You still have a chance to fix this, Caleb. Please, just talk to me." It was impressive, in a way, how quickly they rewrote the entire past. How seamlessly my exhaustion had become abandonment. How years of quiet, invisible support had been erased in the space of a weekend. How easily the people who claimed to love me couldn't see me beyond what I could give. Around noon, Kayla called again. This time I answered. "You made your point," she snapped before I could speak. "So what now?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, what do you want? A thank you? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Is that what you wanted to hear?" I took a breath. "No, you're not sorry." She went silent. "You're just mad you lost control. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you don't have access to me anymore." The line stayed quiet for a while. Then she said, low and bitter, "So you're really going to let us suffer?" I looked over at Riley inside the cabin, curled up on the couch, reading with her feet tucked under her. I heard the fire still cracking, smelled pine wood and earth in the air. "Yes," I said. "I am." Then I hung up. They say people show their true colors when the money runs out, but I think they show something worse when the person funding the money finally stops picking up the phone. By Tuesday morning, the silence was noticeable, not peaceful, more like a stretched cord that hadn't snapped yet. No texts, no calls, no new accusations, and for a moment, I almost believed they'd back down. But Riley saw it before I did. She nudged me gently over coffee and tilted her phone toward me without saying a word. Kayla had posted to Facebook. Public, not private. Not cryptic either. Some people pretend to care about family until they're needed. Then they disappear. Imagine choosing money over blood. Sad. It had 3 likes. One from a friend I didn't recognize, one from my mother, and one from a profile that sounded suspiciously like a second account Devin had used in high school. I didn't comment, didn't react, didn't let them bait me into performing outrage or defense. But that post was only the beginning. They'd been quiet because they were busy rebuilding the narrative in a way that would make me the villain and themselves the victims. They couldn't stop the bleeding, so they decided to make a show of it. That afternoon, I got a call from an old friend, Marcus. He lived 3 houses down from my mother and had never once inserted himself into our family business. When I picked up, I could hear something different in his voice, hesitation coated with concern. "Hey man, sorry if this is out of line," he said slowly. "But is everything okay with your folks?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "Your mom was outside yelling at some guy from the mortgage company," he said. "She was going off about how it's illegal to cancel payment plans without notice, and something about how you put her in this position." It got loud enough that the mailman crossed the street to avoid it. I closed my eyes and pressed my fingers to my temples. "Thanks for letting me know." By the time the sun went down, I had 4 missed calls from the mortgage company's automated system and 1 email from the account manager I had originally set the auto-pay up with. "Hello, Caleb. I'm reaching out as a courtesy. We've received multiple contacts from your listed occupant attempting to reinstate the canceled payment plan. As per policy, no changes can be made without your direct authorization. Please confirm whether you'd like us to proceed with account closure." I clicked the confirmation link and closed the account. I didn't tell Riley right away. She looked so peaceful that evening, curled into the couch with a book in one hand and a glass of red wine in the other. There was a soft playlist humming in the background, and the scent of something simmering on the stove filled the apartment with warmth. I realized in that moment how long it had been since I'd shared space with someone who didn't need me for something, who just wanted me there. But peace has a short shelf life when you've grown up in a house fueled by chaos. 2 nights later, Devin showed up unannounced. He looked thinner than I remembered, not unhealthy, just smaller, like he had lost something he didn't even realize he was carrying. He didn't even try to look angry. He just stood there in the doorway like a kid lost in the middle of a storm and said, "I didn't know where else to go." I let him in without saying anything. We sat on opposite ends of the couch for what felt like hours without speaking. Eventually, he looked over at me, rubbing his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. I thought about it. Then I answered honestly. "Because you wouldn't have heard me. None of you ever did." He nodded slowly, not defensively, not in denial. "I was a kid when all this started. I didn't get it." "I know." He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "I don't know how to fix it." "You don't," I said. "That's the thing. You stop expecting someone else to carry you." He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just sat there, tired and quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel resentment toward him, just a quiet kind of pity that sat behind my ribs and refused to move. 2 days later, it was my mother. Riley peeked through the peephole, turned to me, and said, "It's your mom. She's alone." I hadn't seen her face to face in almost a year. When I opened the door, she was already halfway through composing the expression she thought I wanted to see. Not sadness exactly, more like wounded strength. A woman doing her best, carrying burdens too heavy to name. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice softer than I remembered. I stepped aside and let her in, not because I wanted to, but because part of me was curious what version of her would show up today. She sat on the edge of the couch without removing her coat, like she didn't plan to stay long. "I didn't come here to fight," she began, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I came to understand." I stayed standing. "What is it you don't understand? That I'm tired? That I've spent 10 years being treated like a bank with a heartbeat?" She flinched slightly, but recovered. "I know we weren't fair to you, but we didn't know how much you were doing. You never said anything." I let out a quiet laugh, cold and sharp. "And that makes it okay? Because I didn't scream louder, it wasn't happening." She looked up at me, eyes already glistening. Not tears yet, but the kind of moist performance she'd perfected over the years. She was always better at pain than guilt. Guilt didn't get her what she wanted. "I'm your mother," she said. "I raised you. You wouldn't be where you are if not for me." "There it is," I said. "The debt collection line." She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not paying your mortgage. I'm not bailing out your daughter. I'm not a son you can withdraw from like an ATM and then shame when the balance runs low." She stood then, slower than usual, her shoulders pulled tight and square. "So that's it. You're just done with us." "I'm done being used." She walked to the door, hand on the knob, and paused. "You'll regret this one day." "No," I said. "I'll regret not doing it sooner." Then she left. No slammed door. No final blow. Just the quiet click of something closing, and this time, staying closed. Riley walked over and slipped her hand into mine. You okay? I looked at her, then at the silence still humming in the room. I think I am, I said. And for once, it felt real. There were no texts the next day. No calls. No messages pretending to check in while waiting to ask for something. It was like someone had unplugged the constant current of need and guilt that had followed me for years. The silence was louder than any of their shouting had ever been, and for the first time, it didn't scare me. But grief doesn't only come from death. It comes from the death of hope, of fantasy, of waiting for something that never arrives. And I realized, sometime that night as I sat alone while Riley cooked dinner, that I wasn't mourning the relationships. I was mourning the idea that one day, they'd wake up and say, "Thank you. I see you now." That fantasy died that night. And it didn't scream. It just slipped quietly out of the room. A week passed, maybe a little more, and I kept waiting for the next wave to crash. But nothing came. No middle-of-the-night phone calls. No last-minute emergencies disguised as family check-ins. Not even a guilt-heavy voicemail to test the waters. It was strange. Not peaceful exactly, but something like it. At night, Riley and I would sit on the balcony, sipping tea or wine depending on our moods, listening to the city buzz far beneath us. The quiet felt unfamiliar at first, like someone had taken away background noise I'd grown used to tuning out. But slowly, I realized I could hear myself think again, and I hadn't done that in years. A few nights later, maybe the 9th or 10th since my mother's visit, I opened the spreadsheet I'd been using for years to track everything. Not for proof, not to make a point, just because I needed to see the truth laid out in front of me one last time. Mortgage payments dating back 4.5 years. Tuition support for Devin, sometimes small transfers, sometimes full semester balances. Grocery help for Kayla that always turned into rent money. Daycare bailouts. Last-minute Venmo transfers that were never truly emergencies. A laptop for school that ended up on Facebook Marketplace a week later. A Christmas gift that was just covering someone else's overdraft fees. I totaled it all, every dollar. $63,710. That's what it had cost to keep a place in a family that saw me as a function, not a person. I stared at the number for a long time, then deleted the file. Not out of anger, not out of pettiness. I just didn't need it anymore. They weren't going to pay me back. Not with cash. Not with acknowledgement. I wasn't holding onto evidence. I was letting go of weight. The quiet didn't last much longer. 12 days after my mother left my apartment, my phone buzzed with a notification I almost didn't notice. It was a new group chat. The name said it all. Family emergency. The first message came from Kayla, a voice memo that sounded like it had been recorded while pacing aggressively. "Okay, Caleb, this isn't funny anymore. Mom's behind on the mortgage. I'm 2 days from an eviction notice. Devin's threatening to drop out. Are you really going to sit there and just let this happen? Let it happen. Like I was the weather. Like I was a natural disaster sweeping through their lives. Not the person who had spent years cleaning up every mess they left behind." The next message was from Mom. Long, dramatic. Familiar. "I know you're angry, but you don't understand how hard this is for me. I've raised 3 children on my own. I've sacrificed everything. I am on the verge of losing everything. Please, Caleb, help us fix this. Just once. Just this once." There it was again. Just this once. As if all the other just this once favors had never happened. As if I was starting from zero and not from 60 grand deep in unpaid gratitude. Then Devin jumped in, trying to sound like the adult he hadn't quite become. "Look, I know I haven't exactly earned this, but helping us out isn't just for us. It's for you too. You don't want this on your conscience, man. Trust me." And there it was, the pivot. When begging didn't work, they went for guilt. And when guilt failed, they always found their way to threat. Sure enough, Kayla followed with another voice memo, her tone colder now. "If you're going to act like a stranger, don't be surprised when we treat you like one. Don't expect holiday invites. Don't expect kindness. You've made yourself very clear." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't mad. I wasn't even hurt. But I was exhausted by the predictability of it. They had used every tool in their emotional arsenal, and none of it landed. Not this time. So I waited, not for them to calm down, but for me to find the exact words I needed. Then I typed, I see you're still confusing support with servitude. I didn't cut you off to punish you. I did it because you've built your lives around taking from me without once considering what it cost. I'm not cold. I'm just finally warm enough to stop freezing so the rest of you can stay comfortable. I hit send. Silence. Not just in the chat, but inside myself. No shaking hands. No tight chest. Just stillness. I set the phone down and joined Riley in the kitchen, where she was flipping through a cookbook and humming to herself. She glanced up, eyes searching my face. "Still holding the line?" she asked. I nodded, and she smiled like she already knew. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I didn't feel like a bomb was ticking beneath my floorboards. I just felt grounded, like my own feet belonged under me. 3 days passed. No updates. No pushback. I thought maybe they'd finally accepted it. Until the phone rang again. Not from Mom. Not from Kayla. Not from Devin. It was Mariah, my cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. We weren't close. Last I'd seen her, we were teenagers hiding from her mom's, shouting in the basement of my uncle's house. She always remembered my birthday, though, and her texts, rare as they were, had always felt genuine. So when she called, I answered. "Hey, Caleb," she said, a little breathless, a little hesitant. "I'm not trying to take sides. I just thought you should know something." My stomach tightened. "What's going on?" "They've started calling around," she said. "Your mom, Kayla, even Devin, I think. They're reaching out to extended family, telling people you abandoned them, that you left them in a financial crisis with no warning." She paused, then added, "I even heard Anton talking about a GoFundMe." I exhaled slowly. "Wow. They're painting you like the villain," she said softly. "Like you just cut them off for no reason. But I saw that message you sent, the screenshots. I know the truth, Caleb. I just wanted to say, you don't owe them anything." Something in her voice made my chest ache. Not in a painful way, just a release of pressure I didn't know I'd been holding. It wasn't just that she was on my side. It was that she saw it, the years behind the curtain, the work, the weight. "Thanks," I said. "Really." But she wasn't done. "They're not just hurt," she said. "They're humiliated. Not because you left, but because now everyone knows how much they needed you. And they didn't even realize how deep it went until you finally stopped." That night, I opened Facebook. I found the GoFundMe. Emergency support for a struggling family. Created by Kayla. A heartfelt description about a single mom, an aging parent, and a younger brother trying to stay in school. No mention of me. No word about the years I'd carried it all. I was a ghost in their story, scrubbed clean like a bad edit. The post had raised $140 in 2 days. Most of it came from 3 people. The same 3 who'd liked Kayla's earlier post. The rest of the world hadn't bought it. That was when I knew the tide had turned. They weren't just losing access to my money. They were losing the illusion that the world would save them. The audience they expected to cheer never showed up. They had to sit in their own story now, and I wasn't coming back to rewrite it for them. The last message came late at night, after 3 more days of silence that felt more like retreat than surrender. I was half asleep when my phone buzzed against the nightstand, and I almost ignored it, assuming it was some random email or update. But when I saw the name in the preview, I sat up straight. Just one sentence from my mother. No pleasantries, no punctuation, just, "We won't bother you anymore." I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't quite believe it. Not an apology. Not even a real goodbye. Just resignation. The quiet defeat of someone who finally realized the usual tools, shame, guilt, manipulation, no longer worked. That was the moment I knew I was free. Not because they gave up, but because I stopped hoping they'd become someone different. I put the phone back down, rolled over, and didn't wake Riley. The next morning, as we stood on the balcony watching the city ease into another day, she reached for my hand without asking anything. Her silence said more than any comfort could. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for impact. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for the next crisis to steal my time, money, or peace. I was just standing still, with nothing left to prove and no one left to chase. A few weeks later, I heard from Mariah again. She sent me a screenshot of a new GoFundMe update, where Kayla had tried to reframe the entire thing as a learning moment. It read like a PR campaign. Every family has struggles, and we are learning to stand on our own. We're grateful for all who've supported us during this difficult transition. I stared at the screen, amazed by the audacity of rewriting history in real time. No mention of me. No accountability. But no more attacks either. I wasn't useful to them anymore, so I was finally invisible. And this time, I preferred it that way. It had taken more than money to keep that family running. It had taken pieces of my time, attention, peace of mind, little fragments of my identity chipped away so quietly I didn't notice until something finally broke loose. And what broke wasn't the relationship. It was the illusion. The idea that one day, they'd come around and recognize the sacrifices for what they were. That maybe, just once, someone would look at me and say, "You mattered. What you did mattered." But that acknowledgement never came, and I stopped needing it to. Because the version of love I had been raised on was always conditional. Conditional on compliance, on usefulness, on silence. The moment I stepped out of that role, the love turned cold, sharp, transactional. That's not family. That's a contract no one ever signed, but everyone enforced. A few days later, Riley and I took a weekend trip to the same cabin we'd stayed in when everything first imploded. We brought more food this time, more books, more warmth. We barely spoke about my family. We didn't need to. What mattered wasn't the chaos I left behind, but the quiet I had chosen instead. We hiked, cooked, sat in front of the fire, and said nothing for hours, because nothing needed fixing, and no one was waiting for me to fix them. On the final night, she turned to me with a small smile and said, "You don't seem heavy anymore." And she was right. I wasn't. The weight I had carried for years wasn't just financial. It was emotional, spiritual, familial. A kind of responsibility that made me forget I was allowed to want things for myself without apology. A kind of constant noise that convinced me silence was selfish. But now that silence had a sound, it was peace, stillness, space. And it belonged to me. Not long after, I ran into Devin at a gas station on the edge of town. He looked surprised to see me, not uncomfortable, just caught off guard. We exchanged a few awkward pleasantries before he finally said, "I got a job." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, warehouse stuff," he said, looking down at the concrete. It's not what I wanted, but I needed to stop waiting for someone to bail me out. I nodded. That was all I could offer him. Not money, not support, just a nod. "You still angry?" he asked. I thought about it, then shook my head. Not angry, just done. He didn't argue, didn't try to push it further. And when he walked away, I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel responsible. I felt relieved that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally heard me, even if it took everything falling apart first. I haven't spoken to my mother since that last message. I doubt I will. There's a small part of me that wonders if she still tells people a version of the story where I abandoned them in their darkest hour. I've accepted that, because in her story, I'll always be the villain the moment I stopped being the savior. But I didn't abandon anyone. I just stepped out of a role I never auditioned for. And in doing so, I became something more than the family fixer. I became a person,